feathering your light does not make your light softer. Feathering your light does not make your light softer. I'm going to jump into that because there are some nuances. I'm gonna keep it real. There are some nuances, and I think what people mean when they say feathering, in my opinion and how I define it, is a bit off and a bit different. So I'm going to jump into that. But before I do that, feathering does not soften the light. Now, if we have a little lesson here, okay, what softens light? Making the light source larger relative to your subject. That's what controls the softness, right? When we talk about soft light or hard light, what we're really looking at is the transition from highlight to shadow. Is that transition smooth? Is there a long gradation from that highlight to the shadow, or is it abrupt? Do we go, from a highlight to a shadow and that line in between is very defined? That's really how we determine soft light and hard light. And what makes the light softer is making the light larger relative to the subject. When you feather the light in the context of how most people use it, when they say feather, you are inherently making the light source smaller relative to the subject, and making the light smaller is going to produce a harder light, which is going to produce more defined shadows. It's going to have more contrast. So it is not making the light softer. Now, one thing that can tend to happen, and we can see right here. So, in this space right here, this isn't a full wall, but let's say this was a full wall right here. If I were to feather this light, so we're going from, say, a Rembrandt position to feathering it, I am going to get some bounce over here, which is going to fill in some shadow on this side. So it does, in that sense, perceive to be softer. And in a way it is softer because you're turning an entire wall into a light source. So that's pretty big for your subject. So again, there are some nuances, but on the surface, feathering light doesn't create softer light. Other things may make the light softer, but feathering it in and of itself absolutely does not make the light softer. And I will show that a little bit later here in the video. Now, I want to get into the nuance because I think when people speak about feathering, to me, there's two different things that are being discussed. And in my definition, and again, this is just my definition, I'm certainly not saying that this is technical. You absolutely can agree or disagree. But there's two different things that people are referring to, and I don't consider one of them to be feathering, okay? Now, if we take a step back, generally, for my definition, when you are feathering a light, in most practical senses, it's to avoid or determine how much light you want on the background, right? So if I'm standing here and I don't want a lot of light on this background, I want to feather this light so that I don't get that light on the background. Whereas if I want the light on the background, I'm going to have it facing more this way, it goes on the background. Okay. I had saw a post in a Facebook group that a photographer was talking about feathering the light because he didn't like the specularity that he got on his subject from using his modifier when that light, the center of the light, was hitting the subject. Now, depending on your modifier, yes, you can have a hot spot in the center. Now, what I love about these glow modifiers is that they all come with the deflector plate, and then also the inner diffusion has a second layer of fabric to eliminate the hot spot. So all of my modifiers, for the most part, they meter evenly throughout the entire modifier. So I don't really have to deal with hot spots. But he mentioned feathering, so that way he would be lighting his subject with the outer perimeter and not the center. And I don't find that to truly be feathering, nor do I feel that you need to feather. I feel that that's more of a light placement issue and not feathering. So let me go into that in more detail. So right now I have this light set up. It's in Rembrandt. It's kind of harder to see in the video, but right now the center of the light, which is right here, is what is hitting the subject. Okay, we've got the center right there. 45 degree down. So we have our Rembrandt. And so if you had a modifier that was hotter in the center, okay, you are obviously going to be lighting your subject with the hottest part of the light. And depending upon how you're framing your subject, whether it's a headshot or, a full body, you obviously can have some exposure differences, right? If I'm lighting the face with this, so I'm metering for this part right here, whatever's being lit by the outer perimeter of the modifier is going to be a bit underexposed, because obviously I'm metering for this, and this center part could easily be 2 or 3 stops hotter than your perimeter, right? So people will say, I don't want to light my subject with the center. Don't light your subject with that hot spot. You're gonna potentially get more specularity, that sort of thing, which that'll have to be a whole nother video, okay? Because the light being brighter here doesn't inherently increase specularity. You could still have specularity with the softest of light. If you have a person with very oily skin, it will reflect light no matter how soft it is. So specularity, it's not just because this is hotter, but anyway, that's a whole separate thing, okay? So people will say, don't want to do it there. So what they typically will say is feather that light. Now, going back to what I was talking about with the size of the light source, now you can see right here how big this light source is relative to the subject. But as I feather this, you can see now how much smaller the light source appears relative to the subject. But in feathering, I now have my subject being hit by this outer perimeter right here. Okay, so here's the hot spot. The hot spot's coming out in front of the subject at this point. The subject would be being lit by this outer perimeter. So mission accomplished. However, at this point, number one, we've really changed our light pattern. Okay, this isn't as Rembrandt as we would want. And this isn't necessary, right? We don't have to feather the light. So when people talk about feathering in this context, I've always find it to be unnecessary, because you don't have to feather the light to get them on the edge, okay? If I come back here, all I have to do is simply move the light, right? Now, as I move that light, you can see that the light source stays the same size. It's not getting any smaller. But right here, the subject is being lit by the outer perimeter. When I come here, the subject is being lit by that outer perimeter, but I'm still able to maintain the same 45-45 Rembrandt because I'm not turning it. As I feather it, if I feather it, I'm going more into a split light position than I am Rembrandt, and that's not what we want, and it's absolutely not necessary. If your goal is to just light the subject with the perimeter, simply move it over. That's all you have to do, okay? We don't have to feather it this way to get on the edge. All we have to do is move it. So I tend to look at, if I am moving a modifier simply to have the subject being lit by a certain part of the modifier, if I'm keeping the same lighting pattern, to me, that's just light placement, light adjustment. That in my definition, it's not feathering. Again, I'm not saying that it technically isn't, right? Because even when you feather, you're technically changing the light position. So they can be interchangeable. But for me, when I say feather, I'm not talking about moving the light to be able to have my subject lit with the outer edge. That's just light placement. I can move this, and no matter what, I still have the same light position, so I'm still getting that same light pattern on the subject. Feathering, okay, typically when you're feathering, the main use case is you want to have light on the background or you don't. That's really when you're feathering light. If you're not really trying to control that, and there could be other situations, I'm not saying that's the only one, but that is the predominant reason of why you typically feather light. It is to control the light hitting the background or the light hitting something. Glasses, if your subject is wearing glasses, you can tend to feather that light just so that way the reflection doesn't show up in the glasses. You may have something else in your space that is reflecting light or bouncing light, and you don't want that light to hit it. That's typically when you're feathering light. But if it's just a matter of, I don't want to have my subject being lit from the center, I want it to be more on the edge, that's simply light placement. Just move the light on the same axis there's absolutely no reason to feather it in that case. Just move it so that way you still get the same light pattern and the same quality of light, okay? If I feather this, which again, the main reason of why you feather is to avoid that light hitting the background. So right there, we have the light not on the background. So obviously there's a big difference in the background, and this is typically why you're feathering, because you want to eliminate or reduce the light that's hitting the background. But you can also see that our highlights are indeed different between the non-feathered light and the feathered light. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't feel like doing the screen record so I can mark this up and show you, but you can see on the screen, if you look at the forehead, if you look at the bridge of the nose, if you look at the chin area, the highlights are more pronounced. And that is an indication that this is a harder light. Now, because of how I had it positioned, we're not seeing a big shift in terms of the light pattern itself. The way that it was initially positioned, it was more of a loop, and it continues to be a loop. But we really can see in those highlights and the transition from the highlight to the shadow. And keep in mind that shadow doesn't mean dark black, okay? You know, you can see the exposure gradient. It is smoother on the shot where it's not feathered versus where it is feathered. And the reason why that has happened is because when we feather the light, it is becoming a smaller light source. So therefore it is a harder light source. Now people have to also understand that a harder light source doesn't mean a hard light source. You can have a harder light source that is still softer, but isn't as soft as something else. So don't confuse a harder light source by meaning the light source is hard. It is a hard light source like a bare bulb. You can see in these two, when you specifically look at the highlights, that the highlights are smoother on the non-feathered shot than they are on the feathered shot. And of course, in the feathered shot, we have a little bit more contrast. That contrast is more pronounced because the background is darker. So our eyes are going to perceive more contrast than is there. So there is more contrast in the feathered shot. It's not necessarily as contrasty as it looks, but also, even if it technically isn't, if it looks more contrasty, that is how it is perceived. So perception in a lot of ways is reality. So as you can see, feathering the light does not inherently make it softer. Again, there are things that can be in play, bouncing of light, that sort of thing, that can fill in shadows that give the perceived look of it being softer, but inherently feathering the light makes the light source smaller, and a smaller light source will inevitably make light harder in and of itself. So just keep that in mind, okay? When you're feathering really is more for when you're trying to control that light on your background for the most part. If you just don't want your subject to be lit by the center, simply move the position. You don't have to feather it, just move it on the same axis so that your subject is being lit by the outer perimeter versus the center.